On Tuesday, the 1st of October 1985, a man casually walked around his friend's basement flat in Ashley Road in Bristol's St Paul's district. He was visiting his 62-year-old friend, Violet Milson. He had arranged to go round and help Violet with some gardening. But what he saw that morning when he opened Violet's front door would not just surprise him, but horrify him and stay with him for the rest of his life, leaving detectives baffled still 40 years later. This is the case of Violet Milson. Violet Milson lived alone in a dingy basement flat in St Paul's in Bristol. She was a 62-year-old mother and grandmother, and they were all so welcome to come and visit her, but they never did. She seemed to be a lonely soul, whose only comfort was her big ginger cat. It was her only company, really. But Violet seemed to be scared of living alone, and every night she would place this little note in her window, a hopeful deterrent that people would not knock after 6 p.m. and hopefully ward off strangers. At 6 p.m, as St Paul's began to come alive, Violet's day was always almost over. On Tuesday the 3rd of September, at around 10 p.m, Violet was awoken by the sound of broken glass. Youths had smashed a pane of glass in her front window. Violet quickly got out of bed and the youths ran off. On Thursday the 26th of September, 3 weeks on, and Violet was seen out shopping in the area. She was looking for a chest of drawers for her bedroom, and she searched around the local second-hand shops until she found one she liked. She asked the man who owned the shop how much it would cost, and it was going to be about £10. It was a good deal, although Violet could not spare £10 from her pension. The owner of the shop remembered Violet, as she offered to give him a deposit initially and then pay the rest the following week when she got her pension again. The next day, on Friday the 27th of September, the owner of the second-hand shop was just outside of his shop when he saw Violet once again. She was walking along the street with a younger man, but the way they were talking to each other made it seem that Violet knew him. On Monday, September the 30th, it was pension day again for Violet. As she left her flat to collect groceries, she spent £5 of her £36 pension buying Rice Krispies, tinned soup and cat food. That afternoon, one of Violet's neighbours was around doing the garden for Violet. Violet was at home with her cat, and she came out regularly to bring him cups of tea. She told him what a wonderful job he'd done of the garden and asked him how long it would take to finish it. It was now dusk, and the man was going home. He told Violet that he would be back the following day to finish it off for her. She told the neighbour that she never opened the door after 6 p.m. At 4:45 p.m, and after her neighbour had left the garden in that day, Violet left her home once again in St Paul's, but this time it was to buy a newspaper from the local shop. She headed home, and this was reportedly the last known sighting of Violet alive again. That evening, Violet had apparently settled down at home, turned out the lights, and laid her head down on her pillow for the night. There were a few witnesses that night that were around. The first now was a tramp named Old Sam. He stood outside a shop called the Old Shady. This was directly opposite Violet's home. He was always there on an evening. At 8 p.m, another witness, David Crawley, was walking past Violet's flat that night when 3 youths came out of a garden and pushed past him, but it's unknown which garden they came out of, as he did not pay much attention. At midnight, another witness, a lady, she was walking past the flats on her way home when she saw a man peering out from the gateway of one of the flats, but she couldn't remember which one. Old Sam must have seen all of this, as he'd been sat there outside the Old Shady all night long. Yet, although he could see, he did not understand, as apparently he lived in his own world. The next morning, Violet's neighbour arrived at the flat, as he had promised, to finish off the garden. After he had finished, he went to ask Violet for a sweeping brush so he could just finish it off completely and make it look nice. But as he appeared at the flat window and door, he noticed that the curtains were still drawn. It was really unusual, as Violet was normally up by now, and now it was like mid-morning, 11 o'clock. As he opened the door, he was shocked to discover Violet's body. She was partially clothed and had been violently attacked. And in a panic quickly contacted the police, and as police crime scene taped the area, they looked and wondered who on earth would want to harm an elderly lady in this way. Police were shocked at the injuries inflicted upon Violet. They began the intense investigation, looking into clues as to who could be responsible. She had been strangled, sex assaulted, and her body had been mutilated. Detective Hughes described the injuries inflicted on Violet as one of the worst he had ever seen. As police built up a picture of Violet's final moments, as described before, they now believed that sometime between the evening of the 30th of September and the 1st of October 1985, a twisted killer had broken into Violet's basement flat in St. Paul's, essaying her before using her own clothing as a knot around her neck. Her body had been left in a partially clothed state and horrifically mutilated with what police believed now was a 5-inch knife. The exact details and the extent of Violet's injuries have never been revealed, as police determined that they would be too disturbing to publish. The weapon was thought to be a Stanley-type knife and was never discovered at the crime scene or in the surrounding area. There was also a restraint used on Violet. It was the belt of a pink dressing gown. It was used to tie her wrists together. Importantly, this belt did not match any clothing in the flat and did not belong to Violet, as far as police were aware. Police believed the killer had brought this item with him with the specific intent of using it to restrain her. The police investigation consisted of 80 detectives who undertook a massive inquiry. They spoke to friends, relatives and neighbours, knocking on doors, taking statements, as they began to build up a picture of Violet's life. It was hoped that some clue would be found that may help identify a motive for her murder and ultimately lead to the kill. But what they discovered after inquiries was a picture of a loving, kind grandmother, the mother of 3, who was described by neighbours as a nice old lady who lived alone with her cat in a basement flat on Ashley Road in St. Paul's, Bristol, England. Violet had been divorced from her ex-husband James for 14 years and had no subsequent relationship since, and as far as relatives knew anyway, Violet had not worked for several years before her death, and her previous employment had been at a chicken bar in St. Paul's. She had lived alone in her basement flat for the past 3 years. She was on good speaking terms with neighbours and was well known throughout the area. She regularly visited a local grocery store, which was situated opposite her flat, about twice daily for newspapers and odd bits. She was known as a lady who would welcome any caller to her door. She would regularly give money to the homeless people that she saw while she was out and about. However, living alone, Violet would take a sleeping pill at night at about 7 p.m. each night and would not answer the door to any callers after this time. She'd even drawn up this little handwritten note and placed it in her window. It stated, "No answer after 6 o'clock to anyone. Thank you." On the night that police believed Violet had died, this sign had suddenly gone missing. Did they see it? Did they take it? And did it act as an invite because it suggested a person living alone? Inquiries determined that Violet was last seen at 4 p.m. on the afternoon of the 30th of September. That day she had drawn the full amount of her £36 pension from St. Paul's Lower Ashley post office. She had gone out to do some shopping. She'd bought the Rice Krispies, the soup and the cat food. But what happened between her returning home from the local shop and being discovered murdered the next morning remained a mystery. Detectives had few clues to go on, and there was no sign of a break-in at the flat. Neighbours reported hearing no screams or sounds or any disturbances, and all of her pension money was now missing, but a small amount of cash was found in a purse at Violet's flat. Chillingly, it was this discovery that led police to believe that robbery was only a secondary motive. They believed that the primary motive was sex. The detective said, We may be looking for a man who is a thief as well as an sex pervert. What he did to Mrs. Milson was done deliberately and not in the heat of the moment. After fruitless months of investigating many potential leads, detectives were still at a standstill. It ultimately was decided by investigating officers that an approach to reconstruct the crime for the TV series Crimewatch may perhaps be the best course of action. A TV reconstruction would reenact the last few days of Violet's life to appeal to the wider public for information. The Crimewatch reconstruction focused on a number of points, and it faithfully and accurately as possible created a picture of Violet's last few days. Firstly, Violet had spoken to neighbours about an attempted break-in a few weeks previously at her flat. She'd been relaxing at home late in the evening when she'd heard the sound of smashing glass and it had awoken her. Going to the front door, Violet had disturbed these 3 youths and had witnessed them run away. They had smashed the glass window to the front door, but run away when challenged. Police had been made aware of the attempted break-in at the time that it had happened. It was used as part of the reconstruction of Violet's last weeks. Coincidentally, a description of 3 youths was also described as being seen outside of her flat on the night that she'd been murdered. Was this the same 3 youths that Violet had scared away weeks earlier? Violet had been sighted with a young man outside the furniture store in nearby Stokes Croft. This young man looked to be in his 20s, but as police requested him to come forward, he never did. Secondly, a man was seen coming out of the gate in the location of Violet's flat at midnight by the lady that was walking home. It was the night that Violet was murdered, although the witness who saw him could not be sure which gate he left from. Was it Violet's? He was described as being white, slim, having unkempt collar-length hair, in his 20s, wearing light denim jeans and a light woolen sweater. Lastly, a young man was seen in Ashley Road the same night, crouching and banging his head against a nearby garden wall. This man was visibly upset and was heard to be crying, "Oh no," and was seen to collapse into a crouching position and begin to sob. None of these men ever came forward following the appeal and were never traced. Both the sobbing man and the man spotted outside Violet's house, the man that she was seen with near the furniture store, were never found. Could it be the same man in all 3 sightings? An old Christmas card was discovered in Violet's flat. It had been sent to her in 1976 to 1977, and it contained the following: "To Violet, for my sweetheart at Christmas, Steve." The author of the mystery card was never identified. Curiously, Violet's name had been misspelt. The card was obviously important enough for Violet to have kept it for a number of years, and it was worded as a very personal send. But Violet's family were unaware of any relationship she'd been in since she'd split from her husband James in 1971. So who was Mystery Steve? It was yet another question, but it seemed that police had more questions than answers. As police classified the motive for Violet's murder as an sex crime and then robbery as secondary, this person must have offended before, surely. DNA back then was a thing of the future. Although police tried to take as much evidence as they could, it was something that would not really help in this case. The murderer did leave the restraint at the scene, and it's thought that he had brought it with him. Did he panic and go away without it? After a passage of 40 years, people change drastically in looks, and it's likely that her murderer would now look completely different to how he did years ago. Is he already locked up for other crimes, or did he commit just this crime and then never reoffend again? It's possible that the killer lived or worked in the area. Perhaps he'd gone to school there, perhaps he lived there, perhaps he knew Violet already in some kind of way. Had he watched her? This idea seems likely. Tens of years have passed now, and although the investigation is reviewed regularly, no further progress has been to date. Police have never officially linked the murder of Violet Milson to any other murders in the Bristol area or nationwide. There are, however, several serving whole life tariffs in the UK prisons that could be responsible for her death. But with a lack of definitive evidence proving this is a case detectives had hit a brick wall with in the investigation, it remains as much of a mystery now as it did on the morning that she was discovered. Her family live with the knowledge that her killer will never face justice. The words of DCI Malcolm Hughes perhaps echo this, just how much of a pressing need there is for this man to be caught and brought to justice. Someone in the area must know or have heard something.